importance of theology in both conflict and in reconciliation. And I was wondering if we were describing how if religion is to play a peaceful role in these sorts of conflicts, people need to understand the theology behind it. I was wondering if you could speak specifically to your theology of reconciliation.
Yeah. I think there's nothing more destructive than bad theology. Fundamentalism, from wherever it comes, is the most destructive force in our world today, be it a political fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism, the most destructive force in our world today. And we have some very strange coat theology, unquote, because sometimes I don't want to dignify some of the stuff that goes around as theology, because to me theology is a very pure science. And but I mean, some very perverse theology upon which people build their political and other ideas and ideologies. I mean, one is the chosen people theology. And it's not peculiar to Northern Ireland. I was in Texas last October. And on my Alec and I were in Texas last October. Alec and I were in Texas last October, and on our breakfast table there was a milk carton. And our milk was provided for us by the Promised Land dairies. And on the bottom of the milk carton was a text from Deuteronomy. This is the land that God gave us. Now, you take that out of context, you put that on your milk cartons, and you start thinking, if you're, you know, a Scottish Protestant settler in Northern Ireland, this is the land God gave. Your identity then is shaped and formed by what you see to be a biblical, theological, justifiable, and you become like the Dutch Reformed in South Africa, and before you know where you are, you've built a theology to suit yourself and convenience. So, bad but good theology. Let me give you an example of what I mean by good theology. And sometimes we get good theology from secular sources, which is very important to remind us who profess faith. You remember in the Good Friday Agreement that one of the things that was agreed very reluctantly by some was that there should be an early release of prisoners. That was extremely difficult to people on both sides, nationalists and unionists, who were law-abiding people. And amongst the people who had great difficulty with this early release of prisoners were people from the churches. And I at that time was involved in an organization that was to do with the care and resettlement of prisoners. And I invited them to come for a dinner. You always get people, if you want a meeting, give them a dinner. And so they came. And I invited them to meet with a man called Brian Curran, who you will know. Mm-hmm. Brian Curran came out of South Africa. Brian Curran was involved very much in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa and the whole issue of reparation, etc. And I asked him to come and talk about, from the South African experiences, what they did with prisoners. And he explained it. And somebody from around the table said, but Mr. Curran, where is there justice in all of this? You know, letting out people who've done heinous things early. Where is the justice? And he said, we're not talking about justice here. This isn't about justice. You cannot go to a widow or an orphan and say, this is about justice. He said, this is about giving all parties to the conflict an opportunity to share in a new beginning, whether you think they deserve it or not. And I said, would you repeat that? And he said, it's about giving all parties to the conflict an opportunity to share in a new beginning, whether you think they deserve it or not. And I said, Brian, I don't know where you come from in terms of faith. I've since discovered it sits very lightly to any. But I said, the word we use for that is grace. Profoundly deep, fundamental, using fundamental in the right sense, theological concept, particularly for those of us who come from within our tradition. Grace. And he said, well, if that is your word, keep preaching it, because you're going to need an awful lot of it. And it is a profoundly fundamental theological concept within it. Take away that, and I certainly wouldn't have much left, if anything, because it's about how God deals with us and how he asks us to deal with each other. The unworthiness within ourselves and the unworthiness that we may see in each other. And so I think I give that just as one of the fundamental, using that word in a proper sense, words, theological, that we must hold to and not just think of as on paper, but as something we live by.
And after this brief lesson in one aspect of salutary theology, let's take about 5 minutes or so break.